Hi everyone. I just got home from church and I wanted to read a book, and I'm dedicating this book to a special listener named Violet, who's 11 today. So I wanted to say happy birthday, Violet, and thank you for listening to my stories. I'd love to know which one's your favorite. Today, this one is called The King Without a Shadow, written by R.C. Sproul. And this is my second book that I've read that he wrote. So if you haven't seen the other one, it's The Prince with Dirty Clothes. Really great book. The Priest with Dirty Clothes, sorry. And this has illustrations by Liz Bonham. So I hope you enjoy this book as well. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there lived a king, mighty in power and rich with money. Whatever he desired, he bought with his gold or commanded from his servants. The king lived in a great house called a palace. The palace was so big that it had 100 rooms. The rooms had beautiful furniture and expensive rugs. He had rooms for sleeping, rooms for eating, even a great hall where he held marvelous feasts for all his guests. The most wonderful room in the palace was called the throne room. There the ceiling was very high and the floor was covered with marble. In the very center of the room was the king's royal throne. Several steps led up to a chair that was carved from the best wood. Beside the throne stood a special staff called a scepter. When the king lifted the scepter, people were allowed to come near and speak to him. When he lowered the scepter, people must stop talking and leave the presence of the king. One day, the king was sitting on his throne. He wore a gorgeous robe made of ermine, a very expensive kind of fur. He had on black, shiny boots. On his head was a crown of pure gold with a large red stone called a ruby on the front of it. A large window was wide open, and the sun was shining into the room. One of the palace guards came to the king and said that a little boy was visiting the palace and asked if he could meet the king. The king frowned and said, "A little boy? What does a boy want to see about me? To see me about? Sorry. I am busy and I don't want to be disturbed. What does he want?" The guard said to the king, "I'm not sure, Your Majesty. He only said that he has a very important question to ask you. He seems very concerned and would really like to speak with you. He said it would only take 5 minutes. The king said as his frown grew deeper. "I don't have time to be talking to children. I have a kingdom to take care of." "Yes, Your Majesty," said the guard. "I will send him away. But the little fellow will be disappointed." The king thought for a moment, and his heart began to change. Finally, he said, "Well, all right then, I'll see him, but only for a few minutes." The guard left the throne room and returned a few moments later. He was standing beside a little boy who was plainly dressed in simple clothes and had no shoes on his feet. His hair was mussed up, but his face was beaming with a big smile. The boy was holding a small puppy in his arms. When the king saw the boy with his puppy, he lifted his scepter and signaled for the boy to come near the throne. The boy walked right up to the front steps and looked up at the king. He tried to make a polite bow before the king, but almost fell over because his puppy was wiggling in his arms. "Yes, my child," said the king. "What is this very important question you have to ask me?" The little boy was nervous. He had never been in the presence of a king before. He tried to speak, but the words were sticking in his throat. The king smiled and said, "It's all right. Don't be afraid. Go ahead and ask your question." The boy calmed down and said, "Your Majesty, it's about shadows that I want to ask you." "Shadows?" said the king. "What about shadows?" "Well, sir," said the lad, "I don't understand why we have shadows. My shadow follows me everywhere I go. Sometimes it gets real tall, other times it's real short. Whenever I turn, my shadow turns too. Sure, said the king as he laughed out loud. Everybody has a shadow. My servants all have shadows. My queen has a shadow. The crown prince has a shadow. I am the king and I even have a shadow. The king turned his head toward the side of the throne and said, Look, see, there is my shadow right now. The little boy giggled. Oh my, he said. I didn't know that kings have shadows too. Look, Your Majesty. Watch my puppy. The little boy put his puppy on the floor. The puppy saw his own shadow and began scampering after it. The puppy sprang at his shadow, but the shadow moved away. When the puppy moved, his shadow moved, and no matter how hard the puppy tried, he couldn't catch his own shadow. As the boy and the king watched the puppy chase his shadow, the king laughed so hard that tears were rolling down his cheeks. This is great fun, said the king. I haven't had this much fun since I was a young prince myself. But what is the question you want to ask me? The boy stooped over and picked up his puppy and hugged him to his chest. Well, sir, he said, sometimes it's fun to play with shadows, but sometimes shadows frighten me. When I am in my bed at night and a candle is burning on the table, I see all sorts of scary shadows on the wall. Shadows in the daytime don't frighten me, but shadows in the night make me afraid. Yes, said the king, I see what you mean, but you still haven't asked me your question. Actually, Your Majesty, I have 2 questions, the boy replied. First, where do shadows come from? The second question is, where do they go when they leave? The boy explained that at bedtime his mother would come into the room and blow out the candle on the table. When my mother blows out the candle in my room, then all the shadows go away. Said the king. Those are hard questions indeed. I really don't know. I've actually never thought about that. I'll tell you what, said the king. The questions you ask are very mysterious. I will call my wise men from the kingdom and see if they can answer these questions. If you come back next week and see me, I will have the answers for your questions. With these words, the king reached over and lowered his scepter, signaling to the boy that the meeting was over and it was time to leave. Can you see the puppy? Once the boy left, the king summoned his wise men together for a meeting. When the wise men arrived, the king said to them, I have a problem for you to solve. Some questions I need you to answer. The wise men were pleased that the king asked for their advice, but they were also fearful lest they would not be able to answer his questions. The chief wise man said to the king, Tell us, O king, what the questions are, and we will try to answer them. The king said, My questions are 2. First, where do shadows come from? Second, where do they go when the candles go out? The wise men groaned when they heard these questions. The questions were so hard, they were afraid they would not be able to answer them. The chief wise man said, Your questions are difficult, O king. Please let us consult together for a day to see if we can answer them. The king grew angry. Why can't you tell me the answer now? You are supposed to be wise men. Yet you are not ready to answer the questions of a child? Your Majesty, we understand your concern, but sire, sometimes the most difficult questions of all are the ones asked by children. We beg you to be patient with us and give us time we need to study the matter. All right, said the king, you may have 1 day, but only 1 day. If you cannot answer these questions by tomorrow, I shall banish you from my kingdom and find others to take your place. With this reply, the king lowered his scepter, and the wise men hurried from the room. They quickly assembled together again in the study hall of the palace. They studied the questions long into the night, discussing and arguing with each other about the answers. Finally, just before the break of dawn, they reached agreement among themselves. They had answers for the king, but they still were not sure that their answers were correct. The chief wise man was chosen to be the spokesman for the group. He took a short nap, had a fine breakfast, and then prepared his notes for his meeting with the king. Meanwhile, the king had risen early and was already in the throne room. Instead of sitting on his throne, he paced back and forth on the marble floor. He was very nervous and annoyed. Since the boy had asked his questions, the king couldn't get them out of his mind. He paced and paced, fretting over the questions. All that he could think of was his shadow. Every time he turned around, he saw his shadow. The more he saw his shadow, the more annoyed he became. Knowing that no one else was in the room, the king began to speak to his own shadow. "Be gone," he ordered. "I command you to leave, O shadow." But the shadow wouldn't leave. It seemed to defy the royal commands of the king. "What are you, O shadow, that you refuse to obey me?" The shadow gave no answer and still did not go away. The king trembled with rage, his anger fierce against the shadow. He screamed at it. He pled with it, begging it to go away. But nothing worked. Every time the king turned, the shadow turned with him. By the time the meeting with the wise men arrived, the king was exhausted by his contest with his shadow. He felt beaten, like a fallen knight in a battle. The palace guard entered the throne room and announced to the king that the chief wise man was ready to see him. Instantly, the countenance of the king changed. His spirits perked up with the hope that the chief wise man would answer his questions, and put an end to his struggle with his shadow. The chief wise man appeared at the door. He looked carefully to see if he could tell the mood of the king. The king was happy to see him. He smiled at the chief wise man and raised his scepter. The chief wise man entered and walked toward the king. He was carrying a looking glass in his hand. "Good afternoon, wise man. What is that you have?" asked the king. "Good afternoon, your majesty. This is a mirror, a simple looking glass." "Good afternoon, your majesty. This is a mirror, a simple looking glass," answered the wise man. "I brought it with me in hopes that it might serve to help me answering your questions." Good, exclaimed the king. "You have answers then?" "Perhaps, sire," said the wise man. "We have answers for you, but they are very mysterious. We believe that shadows are made by light. We know that when light shines, we can see shadows. But when there is no light, there are no shadows." The king frowned. "That's no answer, wise man," the king stormed. "I already knew that much. When there is no light, I can't see anything, least of all my shadow. There must be more to it than that." "Oh, but there is, your majesty. Please hear me out," said the wise man. "Of course we can't see anything without light. If there were no light, we would all be blind men groping around our way in the dark. Yet even when we do have light, there is still some darkness around us. It all has to do with this great mystery of the light." "What is so mysterious about light?" the king asked. "Many things," said the wise man. "First, it moves so fast. If we walk into a dark room and light a candle, how long does it take for the room to light up? If we blow out the candle, how long does it take for the room to get dark?" "Why, no time at all. It happens instant," said the king. "Sire, your first answer was closer to the truth than the second. It happens in less than an instant, less than a second. It seems like no time at all. But everything takes some time to happen, even for light to shine. But it happens so very fast that it surely seems like no time at all. That is one of the great mysteries of light." "I see," said the king. "That is most interesting. But what other mysteries are there about light?" The chief wise man handed the looking glass to the king and said, "Look into the mirror, O king, and tell me what you see." The king took the looking glass and held it in front of him. He looked into the mirror and said, "I see myself in the mirror." "Do you see your whole self in the glass, sire?" asked the wise man. "No, of course not," said the king. "I see only my face in the glass." "But sire, is it really your face in the glass?" asked the wise man. The king was puzzled by the question. He didn't understand what the wise man was saying. "Of course it's my face in the glass. I am the one looking in the mirror. It is nobody else's face. It has to be my face." The chief wise man laughed. "Yes, your majesty, it is no one else's face. Actually, it is no one's face at all, not even yours. Your face is where it always is, right in the front of your head. Your face did not leave your body and crawl into a looking glass. What you see is an image of your face in the mirror. It's not really that your face is there. It looks like your face, but it's not really your face. If you look closely, you will see that even your image is not exactly like you look. The mirror shows your face backwards, in reverse. Here, let me show you," said the wise man. The chief wise man took a slate and wrote some letters on it. Then he held the slate before the mirror. Now the letters were reversed, and he could not read the words. "Do you see now, O king? The mirror image is not the same." The king frowned once more. He said, "Does that mean that I do not actually look like what I see in the mirror?" "Well, your majesty, you look a lot like what you see in the mirror, but what you see there is not exactly how you look." The king was amazed. "Do you know what that means?" he said. "It means that I can never see myself as other people do." "That's right, your majesty. None of us can ever see ourselves as others see us. But I still don't understand how this works and how it will explain my shadow," said the king. "Sire, it is difficult to explain. Remember that I said that light has many mysteries about it. The mystery of the mirror is this: when the light shines on us, when we look into the glass, the light makes a reflection. It's like the light bounces off our face and reflects into the mirror. Our image in the glass is not our face, but the reflection of the light that bounces off our face." "That is astonishing," the king said. "I can hardly understand it." "Don't feel bad, your majesty. I am not sure that any of us really understands it. Therein the mystery." "But you said there are other mysteries about the light. What are they?" the king asked. "Sire, if you will, walk with me for a moment to the window." The king agreed and walked over to a large window in the throne room. It was a clear day outside, and the sun was shining brightly. The rays of the sun poured through the window into the great throne room. "Look, O king, the sun streams clearly through the window, but its light cannot come through the door." This is another great mystery of the light. It can shine through some things, but not through others. Certain things block out the light. That is why we have shadows. "What?" the king exclaimed. "What do you mean that is why we have shadows?" "Here, your majesty, stand in front of the window where the light is shining. See, you block the light. Look over your shoulder and you will see your shadow. Your shadow appears where the light doesn't shine. It is merely an outline of the dark place that is hidden by your body." The wise man explained further. Everything that blocks the light has a shadow. It is the dark place where the light doesn't reach. Tonight, sire, after the sun has set, look once more out the window. Look for the moon in the darkness of the sky of the night. Sometimes the moon is full. It is a bright circle in the sky. On other nights, the moon is only half of its size, and sometimes it's just a sliver. This is one of the more mysteries of light. Sometimes part of the moon is dark because it is hidden by the shadow of the earth. When the sun sets, it doesn't stop shining. It is simply that our world has moved out of its light. When it gets between the sun and the moon, part of the moon is hidden by its shadow. You see, O king, that not only everything in the world has a shadow, but the world itself has a shadow. The king grew very quiet. He thought for a moment and then walked over to a large treasure chest in his throne room. He opened the chest and took several gold coins out of it and handed them to the chief wise man. You and your wise men have done well. These gold coins are your reward for answering my questions. But I have one question left. How can I escape my shadow? How can I make it go away forever? I want to be known as the king without a shadow. The chief wise man smiled and said to the king, I am afraid that what you ask is impossible, even for you, O mighty king. To make your shadow go away forever would require you to be able to make the sun stop shining. Even you do not have the power to do that. But I want to be the only king without a shadow, the king complained. I am sorry, your highness. I have heard of only one king who has no shadow. What? Who is this king without a shadow? Where does he live? How can he command the sun not to shine? I know very little about this king. I have heard about him, but I know him not. If you want to know about the king without a shadow, you will have to visit the man of the cave. The man of the cave? Who is this man? Where can I find him? Asked the king. If you would meet the man of the cave, you must journey into the desert. There, by the edge of the mountains, where the desert ends, is a large cave wherein lives a prophet. The prophet is a holy man, and he knows the secrets of the king who has no shadow. I will leave at once, replied the king. With these words, the king lowered his scepter, and the chief wise man departed. The king called together his knights. They mounted their horses and rode off with the king deep into the desert. When they reached the desert's edge, they dismounted and walked toward the large cave. Hearing the approach of the riders, the prophet came and stood outside the entrance of the cave. The king saw him standing and shouted, Are you the man of the cave? The prophet answered, Yes, I am. If you wish to speak to me, you must come here into my cave alone. The king ordered his knights to stay behind as he walked toward the cave alone. As he came near the prophet, the king said, I am the king. Yes, I know who you are, replied the prophet. Come inside the cave and we shall talk. Inside the cave, a small fire was burning. As the flames licked up, shadows were dancing on the wall. What do you wish to know, O king? My chief wise men have declared that there is a king who has no shadow and that you could tell me about him. The prophet was old. He had a long flowing beard and was dressed in skins of animals. He smiled at the king's question and said, Yes, there is such a king. He is the greatest of all. Where is he? Asked the king. Where is the realm where he rules? He is right here. He is over there. He is back where you came from. His kingdom has no boundaries. His realm has no end. How can that be? Asked the king. Every king's kingdom has boundaries. Besides, how could this king be here, there, and back where I came from? You are speaking in riddles, O prophet. This great king is everywhere, all at the same time. He is invisible, so he can't be seen with human eyes. He has no body, no arms or legs, like ordinary kings. He is a spirit, but a king nevertheless. So, said the king, that's why he doesn't have a shadow? Only things with bodies have shadows? Isn't that right? Well, said the prophet, it's almost right, but not quite. It's true that only bodily things have shadows, like those on the wall of my cave. But there's another kind of shadow that even spiritual things can have. Now you're speaking in riddles again, said the king. What other kind of shadows is there? There is a shadow of evil, said the prophet. We all have a spiritual part of ourselves. We call it our soul. When we do things that are wrong, we sin. And sin is like a dark shadow on our soul. Only a soul that is pure has no shadow on it. Does your soul have a shadow? The king asked. You are supposed to be a holy man, and I thought holy men have no darkness in their heart or soul. Even holy men like prophets have shadows on their soul, said the man of the cave. I am not perfect. I still do things that are wrong. Only when I die and go to heaven will my shadow leave my soul forever. The great king, the king without a shadow, has no shadow, not simply because he's a spirit. He has no shadow because he is completely holy. He does no evil. He has no sin. There is no darkness in him. The king without a shadow is God himself. He is king over everything. He is even king over you. He is the one who makes the sun to shine and the rain to fall. His kingdom is everywhere and for all time. The king was very interested to hear more about the king without a shadow. He sat in the cave for hours listening very carefully to what the prophet taught him many things about the kingdom. I apologize. He sat in the cave for hours listening very carefully as the prophet taught him many things about the king who is God. Finally, as the sun began to set, the king bade the prophet farewell. He left the cave and joined his knights for the long ride back to the royal palace. That night, the king did not sleep well. He tossed and turned on his bed. His body was tired, but his mind was wide awake. All he could think about was the wonder of the things he learned about the king without a shadow. Finally, the king fell asleep. When morning came, the king arose from his bed and called in his servants. He said to them, "Find the little boy who was here the other day with his puppy and bring him to me." "What is his name?" asked the head servant. The king was troubled. "I don't know. I forgot to ask his name, but find him anyway. Search out the whole kingdom until you find him and bring him here," the king commanded. The servants left the palace and began searching throughout the kingdom for the little boy. They went from village to village and from house to house until they came to a small cottage. There, in the front yard, they saw a little boy with his older sister and the younger brother all playing with a puppy. A servant approached the boy and asked, "Are you the boy who visited the king with your puppy?" The boy smiled brightly and said, "Yes, I was there with my puppy." "Good," said the servant. "We have found you at last. You must come with us to the palace, for the king wants to talk to you." The little boy glanced at his sister and brother and said to the servant, "May my brother and sister come too?" They didn't believe me when I told them I met the king. The servant laughed and said, "I understand. Of course, your sister and brother may come with you. And bring your puppy along too." So the children and the dog went with the servants to the royal palace. When they entered the great throne room, the king lifted his scepter and invited them to approach his throne. The king was very happy to see the little boy. He said, "I'm glad my servants found you. Tell me now, what is your name?" The boy answered, "My name is Ryan. This is my big sister Kelly and my little brother Michael." "Does your dog have a name?" the king asked. "Oh, yes, your majesty. My dog is called Sir Winston of Wingfield North," the boy answered. Well, Ryan, that is quite a name for such a little puppy. You have given him the title of a knight. I thought only kings could give such a title." Ryan's face turned red in embarrassment. "Oh, please don't be angry, sire. I was just pretending to be king when I named my puppy." "That's all right," said the king. "Bring him to me and we'll do the job right." Ryan carried his puppy to the king. The king drew his sword and placed the flat side of it on the puppy's head. "I dub you Sir Winston of Wingfield North. From this day you will be a knight to your master, Ryan." The children giggled with excitement to think that their puppy was now officially knighted by the king. "I have so much to tell you," said the king. "Come, gather around my throne, and I will tell you the mysteries of the shadow." The children listened carefully, and as the king explained to them all the things he had learned from his chief wise man about shadows and the light. Now, said the king, I have saved the best until last. I will tell you what I learned from the man of the cave about the king who has no shadow. Yes, cried the children, please tell us. The king told them about the great king who could be here, there, and everywhere, all at the same time. He said, this king is like no other king in all the world. He made the world and everything in it. He is king over all things. But why doesn't he have a shadow? Ryan asked. Remember what I taught you? Shadows come from the light. This great king is himself the light. His light is brighter than the sun itself. He lives in light so powerful and so blinding that no one can even look at him without servants and knights. Can't even look at him without servants and knights are not. I'm messing up here. I am sorry. He lives in light so powerful and so blinding that no one can even look at him without becoming blind. He has a special kind of court. It is a heavenly court. His servants and knights are not like mine. They are very special. They're called angels. These angels are in the great king's court every day. They fly over his throne and sing one to another, crying, Holy, holy, holy is the great king who is God himself. But what is holy? Asked the children. What is holy? Said the king. To be holy means two things. First, to be holy means to be greater than anything else in the whole world. It means that God is different from us. He is higher than high and deeper than deep. But that's not all, the king continued. He is called holy because he is pure. There is no evil or wickedness in his heart. He never does anything wrong. He has never once committed a sin. The prophet told me that God the King has no shadow. When he turns, no shadow turns with him. He is all light, and the light is filled with dazzling glory. His light is so bright that even the angels, his heavenly servants, have to use their wings to cover their eyes when they are in his presence. His glory is so bright that even the angels dare not look at him, lest their heavenly eyes be scorched with blindness. The great king bows before no man. All men must bow before him in his great majesty, said the king. When you step into my throne, you must bow down before me because I am your king. I bow down before no man, yet I must bow my knee before the great king. The king without a shadow is so great that even I must bow down before him. He is my ruler. He is my king. Goodness, Ryan said. I thought that you are the greatest king of all, your majesty. You mean there is a king so great that even you must bow before him? Yes, Ryan. I may be a great king, but I am a king with a shadow. See, even now you can see my shadow next to the throne. But even if the sun set and we blew out all the candles in the palace, I would still have a shadow on my soul. I am not pure and holy like the king is in heaven. Until I see him in heaven, I will always have a shadow. Does that mean that someday your shadow will be gone? Kelly asked. Yes, Kelly. When I die and go to heaven, I will finally see God just as he really is. I will gaze upon his glory. I will look directly at the beauty of his holiness. Then, on that day, the day that I see him, my shadow will leave me forever. God will take away all evil from my heart. My shadow will be gone because I will be pure, even as he is pure. He will make me holy just as he is holy. Since I talked with the man of the cave, my eyes have been opened to things I never understood before. Now I'm hungry and thirsty to know more about the king without a shadow. You are excited because you were allowed to visit my palace and talk to me. But now I charge you all, seek the great king, search for his palace. Look carefully for the door that opens the way to his throne room. If you seek him, you will find him. If you find him, you will never worry about shadows again. With these words, the king lowered his scepter and nodded for the children to leave. They returned home, skipping and leaping as they went. That day, they started searching for the king without a shadow. Did you like that story? Do you know the king without a shadow? I hope you do. I hope you stuck with me too. That was a long book. So, and again, happy birthday, Violet. Did you like the book?